She's the first female British High Commissioner to Kenya. She has worked in most of the hostile countries, including Yemen, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But Jane Marriott says what keeps her going is her passion.
I think probably it was just sort of youthful idealism. So for every job, I've always wanted to do three things. One, make a difference, positive difference in whatever I'm doing. I want to find the work interesting because I'm privileged enough to be able to look for interesting jobs, not just jobs that put food on the table. And thirdly, something that's fun because, you know, life is short.
Today on Traktion, I hung out with this Doncaster-born Yorkshire girl who gives it all to me, including so much about her personal life. I hope you enjoyed Jane Marriott's story.
Basil, hey!
How are you?
Very good. Ah, you found my dog already.
Yeah, I'm with, what's her name?
Ernie.
Annie.
Which is a boy's name, I know, but it's a girl dog.
Why?
Long story.
Why? Tell me about it today.
So I'm actually dog sitting Ernie. She's not my dog, but she's decided this is her favourite holiday home, and she's nice company for me as well. And she.
Her or something?
No, she was actually her owners got her as a puppy, but they were told that they were going to get a boy, so they came up with the name Ernie. And then when they arrived to pick the dog up, the owners went, "We've only got girls left."
Annie, you're lucky.
So she's called Ernie.
You got a good mom here.
I think she likes the garden. She spent most of the morning chasing monkeys.
Wow, you have monkeys come to your garden?
Monkeys come through the garden, especially when there's some fruit here.
Oh, then you'll take me to the garden as well, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, thanks for coming today.
So after you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a seat.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And how have you been?
Good, but to be honest, a bit sad. Because after 4 years of Kenya, I'm now in my sort of final preparations to leave it, and I'm not ready.
How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Bit mixed, to be honest. I'm coming to the end of my 4 years here, so in many ways I'm happy that I've had the opportunity to live in a great place like Kenya, but also really, really sad that I'm leaving. I remember when I arrived, so many people said to me, "You'll never want to leave, or you'll want to stay," and I thought, don't be ridiculous. I've worked in many countries, I've enjoyed each one, I've never wanted to stay. Kenya won't be any different, I'll be able to kind of cut and leave, but no, Kenya's got my heart, I'm afraid.
Tell me, what is that thing that, you know, comes to your mind when you think about living and you love Kenya so much? What is it exactly about Kenya?
I think it's youthful optimism, actually. It reminds me of, I don't know, a country for whom so much is still possible if it can create and make those opportunities. And it's a world where I love the vibrancy, the sort of the can-do-ness of the culture.
Yes.
And I've worked in quite a few countries where it's been like, "Oh, ambassador, here are some problems," and you're like, "Great." And you work here and everyone's like, "Yeah, so there's a massive problem, but here's 5 ways we thought we could try and fix it." And you're like, "That is brilliant." I just love that.
So I'm so interested because I know you're born Yorkshire.
Yes.
Yorkshire girl.
Yeah.
Did you ever know that you're going to be, you know, an ambassador someday? What were you dreaming to become?
I had no idea. So I'm from what we call a state school in Doncaster, so funded by the taxpayer. You know, a decent school, but not a top-end school. I don't think we'd ever had anyone get into the top universities. My sister was the first person in our extended family to go to university. Both my parents left school at 16 with sort of very few qualifications, a couple of O-levels as they were then. And so this is beyond my wildest dreams, frankly, to end up as an ambassador to first Yemen and now High Commissioner to Kenya, and going on to do another High Commissioner job after this. So, yeah, every day I kind of think, my goodness, I'm lucky.
You're so lucky. Yes. And now that you mentioned Yemen, I read about your experience. Yep. Not really a good one, but I believe in talking about it for the case, you know, for the purposes of other women, other girls that are looking to doing those kind of things.
Yeah.
You've been deployed in such, you know, seriously. I don't know how to pull that, because these are really hostile countries,
Yeah.
if I should use that. But you know, in a diplomatic term, you can give me a better word. But places like Yemen and Afghanistan and Iraq,
Yeah.
how did you even find yourself there, Jen?
So completely by accident. Quite a lot of the things that have happened in my life are a result of circumstances and me just being able to move quickly and flexibly and open-mindedly to do something. So back in 2003, I was actually working on nuclear weapons-related issues, which is what I'd done my postgrad thesis on.
Was it at the time when after you had just become director of, you know, some counter-terrorism or something?
No, this was years ago. This was back in 2003. Okay. So I was 27. I was just sort of starting out in my career. I was on secondment to the Foreign Office, and the Iraq War happened, and I was not in favour of it, but it was the British government policy, and so the call went around for volunteers who will go to Iraq. And so I put my hands up and I said, I don't know what value I can add, because frankly I'm 27, I don't speak Arabic. The only country I've been to outside Europe was Egypt on a package holiday to see the pyramids, but I am willing to volunteer if anyone wants me. And everybody was quite desperate because nobody wanted to go to Iraq.
Because it's insecure.
Because it's insecure, and I don't think anyone else was stupid enough. And so I ended up as one of the first civilians in Iraq in 2003. And there's a whole bunch of us now who sort of, I think, see a lot of our early career experiences going back to that moment, to a country that, you know, actually we've done something where the ramifications are still being felt across the world, and not in a good way, but actually in career terms gave us this amazing experience and exposure that we just otherwise wouldn't have had.
And then there's this fateful day that something happened. Tell me about it when you're in Yemen.
Which day is that? There were lots of fateful days in Yemen.
When, according to the source, you were visiting to check on the progress of, you know, one of the project that you're doing. Yeah, and so you wanted to speak to the women, but then you want to speak to the men first. And the men were wondering, why do you even want to speak to the women?
Oh, that was, I mean, there were many fateful days in Yemen. I always say in my career, I've had many, many good days, a lot of bad days, but I've never had a boring day. And this was no exceptions. This is
no boring day.
I know, right? How lucky are we that we have this in our lives? Sometimes I'd like a bit more boredom, actually. I'm working on that. But yeah, so I was going to drive from Yemen to the port town of Hodeidah, which was quite a long drive, so we'd stopped off to visit a development project, and the men sort of greeted me, the women were nowhere in sight, and particularly as a white Western woman in a country like that, you get a sort of a weird third gender status, so you're very obviously not a man, but you're able to hang with the men. Yes. But you can also hang with the women, which my male diplomat counterparts cannot do, of course, so advantage being female. So I'm talking to the men, and we're talking about the national dialogue process that's going off in Yemen at the time, which was, I have to say, a good and comprehensive dialogue process. People think it was a failure because Yemen went into civil war, but actually it was a really good peace structure led by the UN. And so I was talking to the men, and they were saying, oh, you know, we want this and we want that, and sort of quite generic things that they were talking about.
They weren't specific.
They were not specific. And then I said, okay, I'm going off to meet your women now. And they said, why would you want to do that? So I said, well, why would I not want to go and see them? And so they said, well, what are you going to talk to the women about? Having clearly worked out that I wasn't going to be having long conversations about babies and sort of hairstyles. And so I said, well, I'm going to talk to them about the same things I'm discussing with you, politics. And they looked very confused and basically said there is no point in doing that. So I go round, and there's a classroom, very rudimentary classroom that's been set up, and there's women in each of the chairs, nearly all covered in the full black abaya. And I treated them exactly as I treated the men. I said hello, in this case I shook their hands, and we started talking politics. And one of the women near the front went, we're very glad you're here. We've actually got a list of things that we'd like you to take to the national dialogue process for us, and sort of unveiled this list that had very specific thoughts about the peace process and very specific demands of the things that they wanted, including access to family planning. Some of these women had up to 20 babies, a lot of whom had died as children. They were like, we don't want this, we want a small number, we want to be able to plan them when we're ready for them. We want healthcare services and provision. We want education for our daughters so they don't have to go through what we've had to go through. And they were just absolutely amazing. So I finished with them and I went back to the men who'd been waiting with growing impatience. And they said, well, what did they say? I just said, they had a list of very thoughtful proposals that I'm going to feed into the national dialogue process, and just left it there.
How did they feel?
I think they were just very confused, actually, because they, culturally you didn't really ask women for their opinions.
You don't have to speak, yes.
And two, I don't think it really occurred to them that the women would have very strong and specific views about how to make life better. And these women weren't just talking about their lives, they were going, big picture society, the things that would make Yemen a better place. So actually, if there'd been more women in the peace process, maybe it would have worked better.
As a young girl, why weren't you scared? Why weren't you scared about going to these bomb explosive areas? And you're very young. You had the option and other alternatives to pursue.
Yeah, and I sometimes wonder if there are like parallel universes, and there's a Jane that sort of didn't do that, and I wonder what she's doing now. My dad's ambition for me was that I would become a librarian at an Oxford University and have 2 children and a nice husband.
Wow.
And I've not managed to achieve any of that, but he still loves me. He's still very proud of me. I think probably it was just sort of youthful idealism. So for every job, I've always wanted to do 3 things. 1, make a difference, positive difference in whatever I'm doing. I want to find the work interesting because I'm privileged enough to be able to look for interesting jobs, not just jobs that put food on the table.
Yes.
And thirdly, something that's fun because, life is short.
Life is short. How old are you right now?
47.
47. When is your birthday?
February.
Oh, we already passed.
So I've already passed.
Yeah, but
just turned
February.
47.
Now that we spoke about Yemen and the war, you understand there's also war happening in our neighboring country.
Yeah.
And there was an incident where the French came to airlift, the diplomats. I'm sure these are your colleagues. You are in touch and you talk about it. And when you talk about your speech that you gave us, July 2022, about looking at Kenya as such a vibrant economy, with so much hope within the region. What would you say about everything?
So I remember probably when I'd been here about 6 months, and I'd started, to be honest, to get a little bit depressed about Kenya. I sort of looked around, and there is a lot of corruption here in Kenya. Some of it's seen as corruption, some of it's just seen as the way in which you get business done. We were trying to get projects done with the government, but sort of hitting just kind of bureaucratic inertia and things like that. And I remember kind of thinking, goodness, this is unnecessarily hard work here, and there are a lot of challenges with Kenya. And then we had one of our regional heads of mission meetings, so where all the ambassadors and high commissioners from East and Central Africa come together, and we met here. And I just sat and I listened to my colleagues talk about their countries.
Is it the same?
And at the end of it, I'm like, wow, yes, Kenya does have problems, but it is the best country in the region by a mile. It's got a head start on all of. Well, I'm from Yorkshire, so I don't like to be too generous with my praise. I like to make people work for it a bit. But I sort of sat and listened to my colleagues and thought, wow, I'm really glad I'm not in any of their countries, because the thing that has really come home, particularly with the civil war and the fallout of that in Ethiopia, is that Kenya is the main large stable state in the entire region. And that means there are a lot of expectations on Kenya, some of them fair, some of them unfair. And one of the things that, as I've seen Kenya, both on the previous administration and this administration, increasingly take its regional, continental, global roles forward, that it gets stuck in this sort of catch-22. So people are like, Kenya, you should do something. And then Kenya will try and do something, broker peace talks or something like that. And then everyone goes, why are you interfering, Kenya? And actually, it's the conundrum I think the Americans have had pretty much throughout the 20th century, where they have actively got involved in things and then been criticised for doing so. And then on cases like Syria, where they didn't turn up, people going, well, why aren't you doing something in Syria? Syria is a challenge.
Yes.
So I think Kenya's experiencing a bit of that. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But all I can say is the region needs Kenya. And actually, the world needs Kenya. And that's one of the things I've been delighted to see, is Kenya's had its seat on the Security Council, the more activist role it's taking in the AU, the EAC, and in IGAD, to bring about... I think the phrase African solutions to African problems can only really be said by an African. Because if Mzungu says it can come across as a bit patronising. But actually it's true. Who best to sort out the challenges in a neighbourhood than the people who live there, who know the situation? And I think over the next decade, probably sooner, we will see that transition to countries like ours in more of a supporting role. And that's, I think, a bit more where we've been with Sudan, where we've had some very high-level conversations with the President, with the National Security Advisor, Foreign Minister, Defence Secretary here. But it's about how can we work together and support Kenya in its leading role to bring peace and stability in the region.
How do you feel about that? Are there things that you wish you can tell them, boy or girl, you need to focus on this?
Yeah, so my successor is a great guy called Neil Wigan, who's currently the ambassador in Tel Aviv, in Israel. He's been ambassador to Somalia, DRC. So there's not a lot that I can't tell him that he doesn't already know about the region. But Kenya is new for him. So we'll spend quite a bit of time together in June, July, when we're both in London, talking through Kenya, the people, the issues. I'm already offloading some of my prejudices onto him. So one of the things I've already asked him if he will take forward work on is work on the borderlands. So the project that Deputy President Gachagua and I launched on the 11th of May to promote relations between Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia at the national, subnational and community level. And thankfully Neil is really interested in that, having previously worked in Somalia. So I'm already happy that one of my sort of keen areas of interest I know he will want to focus on as well. Talking about projects, you've done so much. We've seen you quite active out there, doing lots of things within the community. And most particularly, I want us to talk about the ambassador for a day. Yes. What came to your mind? How did you figure that whole thing up for you to think of that kind of initiative? Well, the great thing about being an ambassador or a high commissioner is you have loads of staff with great ideas. And actually your job most of the time, like any CEO, is to enable people to have the space to be empowered and creative. So the idea came from some of my team who approached me about it and said, look, this has been done somewhere else. It's kind of the opportunity to open applications, take one young woman sort of in for the day and show her what it's like to be an ambassador, something that, you know, frankly, I didn't dream of when I was a schoolgirl in Doncaster, and nor in this case did our friend from Kisumu. So it was just really good to be able to see her excitement being exposed to a high commission, and the team put on a really good day for her as well.
Meeting Jane Marriott, I mean, that's the UK president in Kenya. I usually see her on TV, and I have heard a lot about her work in Kenya, but that was the wow moment, aha moment for me. That was the number one.
So tell me about how you spend your leisure, your pastime.
Yeah. Well, I think if I was to have one regret, it would be not yet meeting the right chap. And I say yet because I think there is a man out there for me
come
somewhere.
on, you're still too young, Jen.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
And you need to throw a singles party and see who will show up.
I think so. Well, I know there's a lot of amazing, great single women out there.
Yes, they are.
The men, they're definitely out there. We just need to, we need them to pop up and show
and
themselves.
it's also about, most of these women have been focusing so much on career.
Yeah.
And sometimes you cannot just have it all.
Yeah.
However, it gets to a time when you've achieved everything, you feel like you're healthy for the other person.
Yeah.
And it's allowed. Have you made several attempts?
A few attempts. Had one sort of 5-year relationship, but bless him, he said to me one day, I can't be Mr. Ambassador. My ego can't cope with being the ambassador's husband.
He wasn't the right one.
Wasn't the right one.
Yeah.
No. So, but I mean, I wouldn't say that I kind of focused on my career to the exclusion of anything else. And indeed, I've been willing to be flexible with my career if I'd met the right person. But he's still out there. I'll meet him at some point, I'm sure.
What would you tell young girls out there, young women looking up to you?
Be brave, be bold, take risks, but make sure you have a support system if you fail, and that it's okay to fail. I remember failing so in the civil service, there's a big promotion to come into the senior civil service, and in 2006, I was talking to my boss and said, look, I'm thinking about going for this in the next year or two. And he said, ooh, you need to get a lot more experience before you do that. And then the following day, he spoke to a more junior, less experienced than me male colleague and said to him, well, you should definitely give it a try. Yeah, see what happens. And so I found out about this and I was like, well, I'm going to give it a try now just to see what happens. And we both took it to this assessment centre in 2008. We both failed. And failing was one of the best things that had happened to me because it's the first time that I got very specific feedback on my styles. And because I'd spent so long working with the British and American military, and I'm from Yorkshire, I'd developed quite a sort of blunt, forthright, directional leadership style. And actually failing was the start of my growth as a much better leader that tries to be more inclusive and collaborative and flex between the different styles for the different circumstances. So I'm really glad that I went for it, but actually I'm also glad that I failed it because I learned so much from it. But it's that so my message I think is fail, but make sure you've got the support system and know how to pick yourself up from those failures.
When you hear about a diplomat, what did you have in mind? I hope you learned a few things here and there about the outgoing British High Commissioner to Kenya.
Of course, I mean, 10 years ago, ambassadors, high commissioners could kind of, call up their visa person and say, oh, can you, give this person a visa? But now it's a very sort of arduous but transparent process.
It's independent.
The decisions are made in Pretoria, as you say, by independent people, and the most that I can do is say, look, this is a really good contact, or it's a government official. Can you hurry the process along a bit? Because sometimes our visas can take a bit longer.
Many thanks for watching the show. Make sure you join us again next Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Kenyan time, only on KTN News. And if you have a story you'd like to share with us, don't hesitate. Write to us through globetraction@standardmedia.co.ke or DM us on our social media platforms at globetraction or at KTN News KE. You can also tap that follow button to me on my social media platforms at Fasil Telewa on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and TikTok for more of behind the scenes. But until then, I hope to catch up with you again soon. Same time, same place. Ciao, ciao.
KT